During this video, I want to explain to you how the pathological left are systematically destroying Western civilization. Political forces are often divided into left and right, and I used to find it very difficult to define exactly what these opposite forces were. But what I've come to realise over time is that these opposite opinion groups actually embody the forces of masculinity and femininity. Let me explain why. Firstly, I think it would be fair to point out that the left of today are very different to the left before the 1960s. The movement, set up mainly to promote better working conditions, have found it more and more difficult to win elections due to the workers in the Western world having achieved decent standards of living. To combat this, they therefore needed to either redefine themselves or become irrelevant. As we all have a primeval desire to survive, they decided to set themselves up as the protector of what they perceive to be vulnerable groups, such as the unemployed, single parents and minority groups. The left, as the nurturing feminine force, tries to solve problems using an emotional viewpoint. They emphasise the need to nurture society, who they see as children in need of looking after. They support a larger welfare state and greater public spending because of this. The right are the masculine and believe in solving problems using rational logic. They believe in discipline and accountability and the realistic management of resources. They are not necessarily against welfare, but they do insist that it's managed responsibly. As such, they are usually against large government control. Just take a step back and try to picture the typical traits of the mother and father roles. Now, as anyone who has ever been in a relationship will testify, it is not uncommon for men and women to look at the same situation and perceive it in very different ways. And of course, this difference of perception also shows through in how they want their government to raise their country. It's an interesting insight and explains why these parties are formed in every country in the world. The politics that has formed Western society was driven mainly by masculinity, because men have primarily dominated politics until very recently. We know exactly what kind of society we get when masculinity is in the driving seat, but what we are now seeing is a move towards the feminine nurturing viewpoint. Firstly, let me explain the overriding principle that is facilitating this demise. It all stems from the confused belief that equality equals the same outcome. Now, we are all entitled to be treated fairly. This is a fundamental right few would disagree with, but this does not mean we are all entitled to exactly the same outcome. People will always have different outcomes depending on many factors. If we work to improve our education and therefore increase our intelligence, this will probably benefit us when joining the workforce or in making life-changing decisions. But even beyond this, there are factors beyond our control. Sometimes people are born with special gifts, such as natural beauty, a taller athletic build, a greater natural intelligence, or one of the many other natural abilities. We are not the same, we are individuals, and therefore we will not necessarily obtain the same outcome. However, the feminine nature sees this as cruel. Accepting we are individuals means accepting that some people will not achieve the same beneficial outcomes. Femininity is protective in nature, and therefore it tries to reject everything it sees as cruel and unfair. Acknowledging difference and individuality means accepting that some people can never attain what other people have, and to accept this is to acknowledge cruelty in their eyes. Hence, the feminine left does all it can to suppress this and promote equality of outcome. This ignorance, however, creates weapons that have been used to devastate our society. Let me explain these leftist weapons of mass destruction in more detail. The first one is racism. Firstly, it must be said that in a homogeneous society, racism cannot exist. This requires the importation of different ethnicities. And of course, the left is the primary driving force behind the importation of these cultures. Importing people in from poor countries is seen as a kind thing to do. The right have usually always opposed it. So it was ultimately the left that has eroded the homogeneity in an attempt to be nicer to poorer people. However, they then go one step further and deliberately help to foster poor race relations. Now remember, they cannot say that equality of rights does not necessarily mean equality of outcome. So when someone or some group do not achieve the same outcome, they believe this is unfair. And it is here where they deliberately create tension within society. When differences have appeared in outcome, the left concludes that the only possible reason this could have occurred is because the majority group must be holding the minority groups back. For example, in education, when white people have consistently gained higher grades than blacks on average, the only conclusion is that the educational system must be racist. When white people have higher employment incomes compared to blacks, they make out that the employees must be racist and they are actively conspiring to limit their prospects. The outcome is that blacks are taught to see whites as the enemy, and this creates racial tension. Now here is the malicious element. They know that East Asians outperform whites in terms of educational and employment outcome, and they know that the Jewish community do likewise. So logically they know there's something wrong with this opinion. However, dividing the community is a power play. They deliberately and maliciously never discuss these groups, but instead try to create division between blacks and whites. They actively want certain minority groups to feel oppressed because they can play the role of protector, and this is exactly what they feed on. Femininity thrives in this protective role. However, just think about that for a moment. They know there are East Asian brown-skinned people who have immigrated here with economic disadvantages, and they know they have outperformed whites in the long term, which proves that white people cannot be systematically racist, but they deliberately avoid discussing this in order to create racial tension. This fulfills the left's pathological tendency to appear as more caring than other people, and to do this they need to create people with a victim mentality. Let's look at feminism now. Feminism is derived from the same concepts as racism. Equality of right of justice must mean there should be equality of outcome. This has fueled the left's initiative to get women to see men as competitors. For example, they have pushed for women to enter roles traditionally undertook by men, roles that in many cases they simply don't want to do, but which they feel obligated to do to prove they can achieve the same outcome. Even today, when jobs like mechanics, engineering or construction site workers are majority male, the left create hostility by suggesting women are being deliberately kept from these roles. But everyone knows that women dislike dirty jobs, and they are much more likely to prefer clean working environments. However, should you try and highlight this, they look at you like you are being outrageous, because you are highlighting differences between the sexes. More importantly, when women are left alone to choose their profession, they traditionally go for caring professions or roles that involve a greater level of interaction. There are countless studies to show that women desire to undertake different work roles than men. For tens of thousands of years, women were the carers in society, and they were responsible for the upbringing of the children. Traditionally, the men went to work the fields or hunt for food because these were physically demanding roles, and men are typically stronger. Over time, this caring, nurturing trait has become part of their genetic makeup, and this means on average they feel more comfortable in caring, nurturing roles. Men still feel comfortable in construction, heavy industries and military because these are the roles they have evolved with. The very notion that the sexes might want different outcomes seems illogical to the leftist policy because men and women are equal and therefore should have exactly the same outcome. This confused viewpoint has helped destroy the traditional family by insinuating stay-at-home mums are not achieving their full potential. Their infatuation that equality equals the same leads to the conclusion that men and women should fulfill the same roles in life. However, men and women have evolved different traits to help them fulfill different tasks, and when combined together they form a balanced whole. It results in the best outcome for raising and building a successful family, which is the bedrock of society. However, to imply any kind of difference is now considered sexist. Research has consistently shown that children brought up in a traditional family will have the best outcomes in life, but the breakdown of the family is producing dysfunctional offspring who are more prone to aggression and social withdrawal. Masculinity and femininity create balance not just in society but also in the home. One finds a natural completion in the other, but now these natural differences are being blatantly used to create division. Everywhere where feminism has taken hold, the traditional family is breaking down. Men and women are now pitted against one another as competitors. Like racism, the left has sought to pit one group against the other, in this case turning the women into victims of male repression, and of course, after the left creates this division, they step into the role of protectors. However, consider this. Over tens of thousands of years, men have evolved to be the protectors and planners of resources within the family, so they are genetically programmed to fulfill this role. But feminism has insisted women challenge the stereotype. The result is conflict, and the man fears he can't complete his role he is genetically programmed to do, which results in withdrawal and quite often depression. It is something referred to as the crisis of masculinity. But women prefer to work in roles where they can express their caring, nurturing side. Imagine if women were asked to suppress their inner natures and were told femininity is toxic. They would feel incomplete. Women are in general more emotional than men because we have been programmed to fulfill different roles in life. Women are taught that masculinity is toxic, despite the fact research has consistently shown that women are more attracted to assertive men. We are being reprogrammed by the divisive left to go against our inner natures, to see each other as competitors rather than complementary forces. This clip from a Jordan Peterson interview with Cathy Newman sums up exactly the effects of feminism.
Bad. You're saying there's a crisis of masculinity? I mean, what do you do about it?
You help people understand why it's necessary and important for them to grow up and adopt responsibility. There's an actual reason why they need to grow up, which is that they have something to offer, that people have within them this capacity to set the world straight, and that's necessary to manifest in the world. And that also doing so is where you find the meaning that sustains you in life.
So what's gone wrong then?
Oh God, all sorts of things have gone wrong. I don't think that young men hear words of encouragement. Some of them never in their entire lives.
What's in it for the women though?
Here, Jordan proclaims that males need help, and Cathy asks what's in it for women. Men and women have coexisted in a symbiotic relationship for tens of thousands of years. Society needs them to get along because the very success of that society depends on it. When one side asks what's in it for them to help the other sex, you know there's something badly wrong. One of the biggest problems the West faces is a declining white native European population. It is the main argument for importing economic migrants, but has anyone ever stopped to wonder why this decline happened in the first place? It was the projection of the feminist ideas that women should be out working and living a life of men. As women now put off having children to focus on their career, many find themselves unable to find a suitable partner later in life. Secondly, women were taught masculinity was toxic and that men should be seen as a competitor. This has caused a breakdown in the traditional family. Now, I'm not suggesting that women should not pursue a career, that's not my point. But the breakdown of the family has only occurred where feminism has taken hold. Those societies that don't embrace feminism have increased in population exponentially, and if it continues, they will become the dominant cultures through demographic replacement. And the ironic thing is, these cultures will not tolerate feminism. And this brings us very neatly onto the next topic, open border immigration. The right have never favoured immigration. The masculine force is generally more protective of their borders and more suspicious of outsiders, and the idea of opening the gates to their country to millions of people they have never met before would strike them as insane. Traditionally, to allow strangers into your tribe could quite literally spell disaster, and this knowledge is hardwired within their DNA, especially as men are the ones typically required to fight if it all goes wrong. But the feminine left see immigrants as vulnerable children, and therefore in need of protection and support. It is no coincidence that the vast majority of refugee workers are women. Those lining up to welcome refugees are mainly women. More women vote for left-wing pro-immigration parties than men. The feminine nature is one of nurture, and therefore they are unwittingly supporting their own demographic replacement. People are waking up to the madness that has been allowed to happen, but they are still confused as to why this is happening, and the gulf of differences between left and right seem more and more extreme. You simply cannot rationalise with the feminine left using logic, because they can only see the situation in emotional terms. You can remind them that over 3 billion people survive on $1 a day, and the influx will be endless, and therefore they are not really making a difference in the world. You can point out that war and famine are common, and that if we set the precedence of accepting refugees, we can't morally turn them away in the future. You can argue that bringing in people with low education levels means they are more likely to turn to crime and more likely to become dependent on the welfare state. And you can point out that such policies are contributing to the ethnic replacement of the indigenous population. The problem is, however, all they can focus on is caring for those people they see as in need of protection, and if you get in the way of that, you are seen as the brutal oppressor. Here again we see the malicious side of the left. Having overseen a decline of the traditional family, which is resulting in a decline in its population, they then oversee the demographic replacement of that society. They know that this immigration will be the end of Western civilization in the long run, but they will pursue it anyway because it fulfills the left's pathological need to appear as more caring than other people. The next topic is often seen as very contentious. However, I feel its role is so important we need to discuss it. Firstly, the left want to see everyone as equal, but within the animal kingdom every single species of animal has subspecies. And all subspecies of birds, dogs, ants, fish for example, have very different outcomes in terms of intelligence, aggression, agility and speed, to name just a few traits. Everyone knows this, but to suggest difference in humans has been forbidden by making it racist. Yet all you need to do is open your eyes. For example, 68% of American NFL players are black, despite them making up 12.3% of the American population. If those stats were about whites, you know the left would be out creating resentment by insinuating it was because whites were conspiring to keep blacks out the game. But when it's the other way around, they stay silent. Those with a genetic link to Africa are more likely to have type 2 muscle fibers, which gives them an advantage in sports requiring bursts of speed. And this is something that has evolved over thousands of years to allow them to successfully hunt down wild game in their countries of origin. Evolution is about giving you the tools you need to prosper in your specific environment. There have been numerous studies into race and IQ, and it consistently shows that ethnic groups differ in terms of intelligence. The brain is, after all, an organ that will develop to take into account each subspecies' needs to survive in very different environments. The reasons Africans have evolved the ability of speed is simply because they mainly lived on game, and most animals move fast, so they were required to develop this attribute or starve. Do bear in mind that most parts of Africa had no agriculture and no written language before Europeans arrived. Housing was basic because it stayed warm most of the year. They led a far simpler life than Europeans. Groups that have evolved in cold temperate climates face more problems in terms of gathering food. They need more complex housing to survive the extreme shifts in temperatures. They had to preserve food in many ways to survive the winter. Clothing had to vary according to the changing climate. They had to rely more heavily on trade to sustain themselves. In all aspects, society needed to be more planned and organised. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but like all the other subspecies of each animal group, we have different abilities based on the environments we evolved in. It's not that we are better than each other, but that we have evolved to operate to our optimal best in different environments. And the fact is, in Europe, we needed a higher level of problem solving ability because our changing environment provided more threats to our survival. On screen is a list of the various average IQs by ethnicity, but I'm selectively looking at those that are affecting Europe at the moment. As you can see, Ashkenazi Jews come out on top with 110. East Asians 105, White Western Europeans 100, South Asians 82, North Africans 84, Middle East 84, Sub-Saharan Africans 70. Now look at the average income groups of Americans by ethnicity. It clearly shows that people from higher IQ ethnic groups are more likely to earn the most in their careers, and this obliterates the notion that white people are holding ethnic groups back because they themselves earn less than Jews and Asians, which is exactly what you would expect if the average IQ ratings were true. You can see clear examples of difference in ability just by looking at the dog species. They are all variants of the wolf, yet they vary greatly in terms of speed, agility, levels of aggression and intelligence. A bull mastiff is a gaming dog with low intelligence, and one of its main characteristics is that it's hard to train them to follow complex instructions. As such, you simply could never train a bull mastiff to be a herding dog or to perform tricks in a dog show. A border collie, on the other hand, is recognised as the most intelligent of dogs, and it revels in obeying repetitive actions. There is a well-known and commonly accepted IQ difference in dogs, yet they all share a common ancestor and are almost identical in terms of genetic makeup. You will find similar differences in every species in the world. To suggest that humans are the only species in the world that does not have variation in ability is of course utter ignorance. Yet who attacks this with venom, making out you are racist for suggesting such a thing? Of course, it is the left. In our society, the left works tirelessly to tell ethnic races that the only reason they are not achieving the same as others is because they are being held back by racist white people. They use it to foster hatred, even though they accept that every other subspecies of animal has variation. Even though they can say that Jews and Asians on average outperform white Europeans. They do this so they can drum up division within society, and then they can set themselves up as protectors of those seemingly victimized cultures. It's pathological and is damn destructive, and they do this deliberately to create a role for themselves. But this isn't even the most malicious part of this conspiracy. As they are actively encouraging open border immigration, they are knowingly lowering the average IQ of Western society. The result of this will be Western European nations will become poorer and unable to maintain their level of sophistication. People with lower IQ are more likely to turn to crime and depend on welfare handouts. This puts public services under pressure both now and in the future, resulting in a poorer welfare state for all. Needless to say, lower IQ people will earn lower wages because they can only manage less demanding jobs, which means the government receives lower taxation whilst paying out more to those dependent on welfare state. It is something that is set to lower the standards of Western European nations. Of greater concern, however, is the fact we are just about to enter a new technological age. Automation of industry will mean simple jobs like taxi and delivery drivers, bank tellers, construction and manufacturer workers, as well as farmers, will be replaced in the near future by sophisticated machines, meaning all those low IQ workers will be unable to make the shift up to a more sophisticated occupation. At a time when we should have been decreasing the population, the left have worked tirelessly to import millions of redundant, unnecessary workers from low IQ countries. This will put the entire European civilization under jeopardy. At a time we need higher level workers, the left have imported the complete opposite. It is also worth considering that only a higher IQ nation can support democracy. A failed state always has low IQ populations, and it is considered that an average national IQ under 90 will be unable to support democracy. Many of these migrants have IQs under 85. As these increase in size over time and white Europeans decrease in demographics, it will result in archaic societies and the collapse of individual freedom, something we are beginning to see now with the introduction of hate legislation, which of course is a direct threat to individual liberty and freedom of expression. One last thing to note is that migrant communities overwhelmingly vote for pro-immigration parties. In Britain, it's the Labour Party. In America, it's the Democrats. As these migrant communities grow in size and influence, it is likely the entire political policy could shift to the left. This will change the fabric of the country forever. Do bear in mind that those of immigrant heritage are more likely to vote for more immigration, as Brexit showed. I hope at this point you can see how the left are facilitating the total demise of Western civilization. They have worked tirelessly to segment and drive division and hatred into our society in a concerted effort to set themselves up as the carers of humanity. In their pathological desire to be seen as virtuous people, they work constantly to keep people from acknowledging they are different with different outcomes, in order to keep people locked in a spiral of hatred and mutual distrust. Masculinity and femininity are not better than one another, but they are suited to different roles, which will affect different outcomes. What we are seeing now in Western society is one dominated by femininity, and rather than nurturing our society to new heights, it is effectively bringing it to an end. To combat this, we need the naturally protective force of masculinity to prevent this decay, and ultimately, this means the rise of the right. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to receive more content, consider subscribing and drop me a comment. I'd love to know what you think. Take care.